Welcome to the Sorch podcast, where we explore Sikh and wider South Asian history, art and philosophy with historians, artists and researchers.
Thank you obviously for making the time to do this podcast and to talk to myself. Obviously a huge thank you for sending that book over. I was pleasantly surprised. I actually thought it was something else and I opened it and I went, oh wow, this is actually really, really professional. I was kind of under the impression it was sent from Amazon. The only reason I make a point of it is because I've been having old books reprinted and I'm aware of the cost involved in getting some of that done. So the quality of your book compared to some of the books that I've got printed, it's just in completely different league. It just goes to show kind of the care and the attention that you've put into your book. The first question that I wanted to start with though, and I guess it would also help introduce you to everyone listening, is where has your name come from? So I obviously noticed it's a kind of a combination of letters and a number. Do you want to just spend a minute or two on explaining that and perhaps introducing yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so my actual name is Hark1karan, but I don't actually use that name. So my artist name is Hark1karan. I think the name is a combination of, I guess, me living here and also being Punjabi and Sikh. So it's like combination of those two names coming together. I think for some people, they'll see that straight away. They'll see Hark1karan. So I think depending on who you are and what your relationship is to, I guess, a certain language or color or familiarity with names, you either might call me my whole name, you might call me Hark, or you might call me Karan. So there's like, it's there. It's quite a, what's the word? Like it's a fluid name, I guess, an artist, yeah.
I find it quite interesting because I actually read it Hark1karan. So I didn't even read it as Hark1karan. I think it's quite interesting, the name, because it actually leaves the reader to decide how to pronounce it. But yeah, no, fair explanation. I actually thought it was Hark1karan and the one and the K were a play on ik, but obviously I've read too far into it. So
No, I think that's quite cool. I think that the fact that you said that it's quite nice that you thought that. So I'm quite happy that you've said that and shared that.
Yeah. Well, that's why I asked, because I was like, I might have it right, but equally I might have it completely wrong. And there's a story behind it. Just moving on then from your name, I wanted to start right at the beginning and ask, where did your interest or inspiration for photography start, and then how did that evolve into wanting to capture the Pind?
Okay, I can give an overview of that. I think me growing up in my house, we had photography and art up everywhere. So I think I just grew up with a lot of art and visuals in the home, and it was something that was always encouraged. So as a young person, I would draw, build things, just so be quite creative and do a lot of things myself. And I think over time, I did want to study that at A-levels. It just didn't happen. So I kind of just practiced, or I took photography here and there, just like anyone. You just buy a camera, just take pictures. It wasn't that serious. And this was maybe prior to like smartphones as well. So you had to have a camera to take pictures. And then I think as time went on, I've started working, you get a bit more money, you kind of get a better camera, and you just start to experiment and explore. And after a while, it gets a bit, I guess, taking the pictures, you need a purpose. And over time, I think I was just looking for that purpose, and I was trying to get everything together because there's so many different things that have happened that have led me to this journey. So I guess being in South London, there was not that many Punjabis. So we were like the community in like Croydon and South London. We would go Gurdwara, do Punjabi things, but we'd also do like, you'd mix with so many different people from different backgrounds. That was quite normal to me.
Sorry, and roughly when are we talking?
So I'm 33. So I would say this is like 90s, early 2000s, all of this stuff is happening. So taking pictures of my environment, and a lot of the things that I take pictures of, I am either part of or surrounded by. So that's kind of something that is different to other photographers. And I always wanted to capture what people are like here, because it's quite unique, like being South London, there's something special about how we mix. Just there's like a vibe, that like an energy there, and I think there's a lot of stories here. Maybe just fast forward, I started an art collective with a lot of people here in South London and London, and we were all working class from different backgrounds. We didn't really have opportunities to I guess have access to art schools and all these establishments, so we just done our own thing. So everything was always grassroots. We can do it ourselves, and that's kind of part of the culture of London music, and a lot of culture that comes out from London. People just do it because they have to, as an outlet for whatever energy they have within them. And then that was quite successful in getting people together and giving people their own platforms to start their own journeys. And as part of that, I met a lot of people. As you said, you do this yourself, you start to meet people and things snowball. So I met a lot of people in the local community, and one guy ran a photography group called Lenses of Croydon. Every month he would have a guest speaker, so quite well-known photographers or up-and-coming ones. And he had 2 photographers that I came across. One was called Charlie Phillips, and he came from, I think it was Jamaica or Trinidad. And he documented the community in Notting Hill as it was coming up. And I just thought, wow, this is amazing. And at the end of the talk and after the pictures, I just thought, where are our pictures by our people of what we've been through? So that kind of triggered me to think, okay, let me go look for this. And a lot of like say, for example, the big Instagram pages, Brown History, or like all these other ones, every time I just go to the bottom of the caption to see who the photographer is. Either they haven't bothered to put the photographer, or you see the photographer is not from the community or from an agency. So it's fine. Obviously, you'd need to capture things, but then obviously they're going to capture things from their perspective. And it's going to tell a different narrative, a different story. Then we build these stories of who we are based on these things. And they're not necessarily the complete picture. It's a part of the picture. So that kind of set me off on a journey to start documenting what I kind of was my life as well. Like the things that we do, go Gurdwara, you have Punjabi food, like this Punjabi and Sikh stuff, like it is part of our life. Then we're also doing other things where we take who we are into other places. You might play football, you might be a writer, you might work as a lawyer. There's so many different aspects to our life that we don't see. Like there's no, in mainstream places, we're not seen anywhere at all. And obviously you get the diversity campaign. Let's put a guy in a pug. He represents all diverse groups. Like all these stereotypes, it's boring. We all know it. And then someone that's kind of like loosely connected to the community will have their place and represent all of us. And I think that's not a responsible way to I guess, speak on behalf of a people. I don't think that's taking responsibility, and it's not the most respectful way to do it. So I just thought, let me just tell our story from our perspective and build it from the ground up and include everyone. So that's kind of what started. And I thought, hold on, there's a few things missing here. And that is, I have access to Bind, what life is like in the Bind. So I've been going since I was like 1 year old. And I was always allowed to just like wander around. So I saw Bind exactly how it was and interacted with all the people and things. So that kind of gave me a perspective of, okay, we do a lot of these things because I know where they come from. So I have this visual link. And I realized a lot of people won't have that. Even people in Punjab that live in cities, they don't go to the Bind. So that for Punjabi culture, that is our reference point. That is the reference point for it. And even in terms of Sikhi as well, it is practiced there. And it's, I don't know, you feel it there. You feel the energy. You feel that spirit of what it is to be Punjabi and Sikh. And I think that's something that needed to be captured. So I guess that's the journey that led me to I guess start the book.
No, fair enough. I'm quite amazed by that. 2 questions in particular that have jumped out. The first one is, so from what I've gathered, your entry into photography was completely organic. And then secondly, you make reference to Punjabi and Sikh. Obviously, there's a distinction between the two. What is that distinction?
So, for example, say with the Sikhi in the Pind, if you're Sikh, you have a gara, you maybe have a pug, you have some signs that you're practicing Sikh. But then in the Pind, you'd also have like maybe some Hindus. So you can tell that they're Hindu, but they're both Punjabi. So they're from that particular place and they do particular things. But that's not necessarily always connected to the religion. But then I guess religion has a big impact on what you end up practicing culturally as well. So that's, I guess, where the overlap is. Sometimes it's actually hard to differentiate because you're so immersed in it, especially for us. It's something we learn to separate as we get older or understand.
It is interesting to try and differentiate between, especially I imagine in the Pind, where those demarcation of practice isn't perhaps as solid as it is in the diaspora, for argument's sake. Okay, fair enough. I'm still quite impressed that you've done this organically off your own back and then developed the book. Obviously, the photography part of it started off as a hobby. What then made you think, let me turn this into a book? What took you from, this is just something I do in my spare time and I enjoy, to, you know what, I'm going to change the way people view us as a community?
I'll just quickly give you a story about the photography thing. So I would say I only learned to take pictures this summer, which sounds crazy because I shot the book maybe 2 years ago. So for me, it's seeing the story and knowing what to capture. I think that's the main thing about photography. Learning the technical aspects, that can come later. So I was like, okay, how can I take this type of picture? So you go out and learn it. But in terms of telling a story, I feel like I already had that, and that's the observations. So I think there's a difference between, I guess, learning to take pictures. There's a lot of things that I still don't know and a lot of things that I maybe don't need. But when I do need them, I'll learn them. So I think that's kind of, when you have an idea, it's best to go with it, because otherwise you're never there's no such thing as perfection. So I think you just have to, and I realized with a lot of artists that's something that holds them back in music or art or whatever they're doing. They're like, I need to learn more. This has to be perfect. There's no such thing as perfect. So that's something hopefully people can take from this. In terms of a book, I thought, okay, we live in an age of Instagram. You probably noticed that I haven't posted a single picture. Like I haven't done a post of a picture from the book. So people have to buy the book to see the story. And it requires them not to flick through, because if I posted all these images, they'd probably last for a day and then they're gone. And you can't tell a story with a single image. And I've bought a lot of photography books where I thought, okay, there's something about another culture or something, and you spend £30 and you're thinking, okay, this is absolute crap. And this photography is being bigged up, big PR. So it was kind of born out of like me being fed up of buying things that are just not living up to the hype. So I wanted to make something that told the story from our perspective. It was something that when you hold it in your hand, you thought, okay, you know what, this is worth £30 and more. And obviously I'm not going to print anymore. So that means it's like an investment as well. So I'm sure people can probably sell this for, I don't know, X amount in the future or whatever. So this value, and it's also something that no one's ever done before.
Yeah, that's true. No, that is true. When I got the book, I tried to think of any similar books that I may have come across. Perhaps some people listening to this may think that this comparison is a bit of a reach, but to put it into perspective, the only other book that I could think of that I could compare it to were some of the books by Kashi House. Like it's a very high quality book.
So why I chose, so when I went to do the book, I thought, okay, this is in my mind, I know this is what it will look like. But then I thought, okay, how do I do this? So I went to research how to make a book. People said, do crowdfunding. And I thought the amount of energy I can put into that, I can just learn how to do it myself. And then I think the next issue was I don't have access to anyone or anything. So I've built my audience, I guess, over 2-3 years. Whilst I was making the book, I was documenting our people in the UK. So that kind of helped build something up there. And then it allowed me time to save up to pay for this. And I had to think, okay, am I capable of selling this? So I had to have belief in my product. It's not even a product, in what the story. Because for me, I don't really do photography, like wedding photography or things like that. Like, it's just a waste of my time. Like, I don't have time. Like, I have a full-time job. So if someone wants me to take pictures of their birthday on the weekend, I just don't really care. So I just needed to make sure that this story is the most important thing. And I knew it would connect with people. So I knew that it would work. And I had to make sure that it was done properly. Because there's no point me doing this. I feel responsible for telling this story, because I'm quite lucky that I can, because not everyone is able to do that from my perspective. So I think a lot of the things were in my favor. And also putting the book together, I was able to tick off a lot of things that are maybe not visible to everyone that sees the book. So you can address things like, obviously, as an independent artist, but then also within the story, you can address things like caste. You can show things like religion. You can show things like culture. You can show history. So there's a lot of things that can get ticked off by just doing this one project.
Just to kind of elaborate on the idea of how the book connects to you, if I'm being like really frank and honest, when I got the book, I was obviously really impressed by the touch, the feel, the quality of it. And I was like, ooh, this feels very professional. It feels like a book you buy off like a shelf in Waterstones or something. And then I thought, I wonder whether the rest of the book is actually going to be worth it. Because no offense, I've never picked up a photo book and actually been that impressed. Nor have I actually found a photo book that tells a story in the way that yours does. I opened obviously the first few pages and I read through it, and we'll come back to this later on, but I was quite impressed that you had put English and Punjabi side by side rather than it just being in one language or the other. But then getting into the photos, I read the first few pages and I went, oh, there's no more words. And so when I saw the photos, I went, I wonder how much you can possibly say with just these photos. And I think I got to the second or third photo, and I've included this in the book review, and it's of the grandmother and the grandkids, like the grandchild, walking what I presume is like an alleyway in your bin. And I can't describe it any other way but saying it got me right in the feels. And I thought of my grandma, I thought of my relationship with my grandmas, I thought of all the stuff they've taught me, I thought of all the stuff we've been through. And then the more I looked at the photo, the more the photo was almost telling you, because then you were like, actually, this is a juxtaposition of like time and generations. Because on one hand, you've got this grandmother, however old she is, obviously been through a lot, seen a lot. And then again, dressed in a traditional Punjabi suit. And then you've got this young grandchild who's sporting the latest in orange sportswear with his t-shirt and shorts on. And I'm just like, mad. Like, it does genuinely say a lot more than I think words could. Again, I think that's got a lot to do with the quality of the photos. Sorry, there was one photo I think towards the end of the book, and it's of a thing smoking something. Again, I was so like, the emotion that you get from seeing that photo. Again, I don't want to influence anyone's reaction to it, because I want everyone to go and buy this book and understand it and kind of see it for themselves. But a number of things. First of all, I thought it was brilliant that you were brutally honest in capturing what life is like in the bin, because as you said in the beginning of the book, you're not here to romanticize it. And as you mentioned as well at the beginning of the podcast, you want to kind of show the community from our own perspective. And I'm genuinely just blown away. I think it's a very beautiful story that you've told, but it's also extremely brutal and honest. Just relating this then back to something that you stated in your book, which is to try and avoid a Eurocentric glaze. What in particular brought you to that decision, and how did you try to purposefully avoid falling into that trap?
I think it comes down to, say, when you see images of India, you just see people at the River Ganges. You see these like stereotype cliche things. And obviously when we meet another person that is from India or whatever, you don't ask if they're from India. You say, are you Gujarati? Are you Punjabi? Are you or another guy from Pakistan? Are you Sindhi or something? That you ask them their culture or their region or whatever, the religion and things like that. So for us, that's the conversation that we have. We can differentiate but still have respect for each other. So we're already having a different conversation to a photographer outside of the culture immediately. So, and it's good to show that, okay, there's this group of people. Otherwise you start to erase your own story. And that's what I guess a lot of photographers tend to do. They erase the story. So for me, I don't have to learn this because I've seen it. So then I'm learning as I'm taking the pictures, because obviously I don't live there. So even then I have to acknowledge I'm not 100% telling the whole story. I'm still then able to tell a story to some extent and tell different aspects of life. And I think that goes back to what you were saying at the start about, okay, you've not been impressed with photo books. I'm the same. So that's why I was like, I'm going to make this, because I know what I want to tell and I know what people want to see. And I think the thing that you said, it's quite a human story. So even people outside of other cultures can relate to this. This is a book that people can relate to as human beings because they're doing human things. But then within that, we can see, okay, they're making roti, someone's doing their pug, someone's doing their dari. Like you said, with the grandparents, the kid, that's something we can relate to. They look like us. My favorite picture is on, I think it's image 17 with there's like 5-6 children with the white pugs on and patkas. And I just thought, that's normal. That's normal there. There's not like, oh, why are you wearing a juda? Why do you have a pug? Like, or no one's looking at them different. That's normal. And other people from other cultures look at that picture and feel the same thing that we feel. They see that happiness and joy in them. And I think that's the power that we have to look at this as we flick through the book.
No, definitely. And I think you're right. Some of the photos just capture like a really deep sense of contentment or happiness or whatever the word is you want to use in this respect. I think I can't quite remember. I think it's quite early on in the photo book. There's a 2-page spread of two little things. One's wearing an orange pug and one's wearing a green pug. And the thing you noticed first is actually the glow that their smiles are emitting from the page, and I was genuinely just kind of gobsmacked. I was like, capturing the photo is one thing, but being able to capture it in such a way that actually conveys quite perfectly what that person's feeling at that moment is not an easy task, to say the least. Just going back then to the inclusion of Punjabi and English, from a completely personal perspective, I think it's really clever because like my Punjabi is mediocre at best. So being able to read the Punjabi and then compare it to the English is really, really useful. Obviously, it also opens the book up to a huge audience. And I guess it also, in a sense, is almost like the DNA of the book in a way, in that the book is capturing photos in the bin from the perspective of a part of that community who is actually now part of the diaspora. So like we've come from there, but we're obviously quite detached in a way. And I guess in a way that's reflected in the language, because we, by default of being in the diaspora, have been brought up learning English as the predominant language. Was that why you included both languages?
I think what it was, so I feel like if I couldn't speak Punjabi, I don't think I would have been able to make this book, because I wouldn't be able to understand what is going on and the feeling, that feeling you get when you speak a language. I think that gave me access to do this, but I can't read or write it. So I think it's something that I want to do. And I think it's a thing of like, I can't just go over there and take these pictures. Therefore, both of us, therefore for us, and going forward, things will be mixed. So the whole plan was for me to go in April and give these books back to them first. They were supposed to get the books first, but obviously with COVID, that's not going to happen. So when they get the books in the bin, if the Baba can't read it, their children might be able to read it to them. So it's about, we can all share this together. It's not just about me coming back and just leaving them. So it's like we're connected. As you said, we're connected, that there is a connection for people that want that connection, because you can't force it on everyone. So there are a lot of people like yourself and me and other people that want to say, oh, where have we come from? What is our connection? This ties us to these people. And that's, I guess, the reason why I wanted to include the both languages.
No, fair enough. I completely can understand that. Considering you have been going to Punjab for over the last 30 years, and the photo book in particular is kind of over the last few years. What has been perhaps the biggest change you've noticed over those 30 years?
So maybe I should explain. I had to go a few times because I've shot the book on film. So every time I take the picture, I don't see the pictures till I come back home until they're processed in the lab. So I take 36 pictures at a time on a roll. So in total, I took 1,000 pictures over 3 weeks of over 3 trips, so a week at a time. So that's something that maybe people can't, unless you're into photography, you probably won't realize that. So that's why I kind of had to go. It works out expensive. It's not the most practical way, but it allowed me to come back and see, okay, these bits are missing, these photos aren't good enough. But then it allowed me to capture over different seasons and different times. Things that I've noticed, so obviously when I used to go as a kid, you'd all be outside around the chulla and you're making bronte and just sitting down and just like immersed with like all the people playing with the kids, with the babbe, getting food. And it was very basic. Like there was no internet, no one had phones. The power would cut out, and it still does in some places. But now, obviously, as I'm getting older, I'm noticing there's not in loads of young people. Not all the young people want to, I guess, maybe keep up looking the same as like their elders. That it's not, maybe everyone wants to wear a bug. But I think maybe these things will also now change with what's happening. So I think technology is coming in and certain things will fade out naturally. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's what will happen. And a lot of stories will die. And a lot of the things that people do that we recognize as traditional, I think will be gone. So there's a few things in the book. There's like some of the last people in the bin that are doing these things. So I think it's just a matter of capturing this before it all changes, because visually it could look completely different in 10, 20 years.
No, completely. I think that's absolutely bang on. I think it's a very clever decision on creating this photo book and it being separate and completely distinct from social media, because it can't be altered, it can't be changed. And I think I found it annoying, if I'm honest, yesterday when I was putting together the book review, because I was like, oh man, I can't find any photos from this book. But in the context of actually not putting it on social media, I think it's brilliant, because the way people consume social media is very much like it's here today, gone tomorrow, and it's forgotten about. And by default of you not putting them out there, like you already mentioned, it makes you go and have to get the book.
I could have sent you the press release if I'd known you were writing the.
No, it's not a problem. To be honest, it works, because then the photo that I've taken of the photo captures my like perspective of it, if that makes sense. So it's not like a problem if you get, but it's more of like at the point yesterday I was a bit like, I wonder why he hasn't done this. But in context of of what you've said, it makes absolute sense. So I can't blame you for that.
I think in terms of me telling the story, before obviously you have like a plan in your mind. Okay, so I had a vision of what I've seen. And then you have like a vision of what people talk about, okay, like farmer suicide, alcoholism. So I'm thinking, okay, I need to capture these things. You go out there and it doesn't work like that. So I thought, if I'm going to look for these things as a part of the whole story, then it would be fine. But if I'm just going to look for those particular things, I'm not going to tell the story that I need to tell. So I would just walk around and just capture things. So I would like go in the evening, go in the morning, and just see, okay, there's a school. Let me see what life is like at school. Okay, everyone's on the kit. Let me go in the kit. Like, it's just following people, chatting to them. By the third trip and the end of the third trip, like no one cared that I was just walking around. I had to stop people saying, people wanted their picture taken. And I was just like, I don't have enough like film, because it cost a lot of money as well. So people wanted their picture taken. It wasn't like, oh, I'm asking. So there was just like the pictures got better and better the more time I spent there, and I was able to just capture really natural things. And I think I guess the story is all there. And I feel like it's okay with the caption thing, it's okay for people not to understand things. And I think that's a sense of frustration they should have, because you can't just have access to everything. And I think that's a human thing. Okay, I don't understand what's going on here. Maybe I need to look it up or try and understand. Like you want people to think, and different people. Some people won't understand the whole book. Some people might only understand a few things, but that's okay, because you can pick up the book in 5-10 years and be like, okay, I get all of this. So it's just a journey, and everyone has different levels of understanding and access to that knowledge. And I think that's okay. But sorry, just another thing that's happened out of this is that it's an experience that people can share with their parents, their kids, and their grandparents. So people started sending me images. Oh, their grandparents are going through the book with them, explaining what's happening. So it's a great way to educate and connect everyone together. So I think that's been a beautiful thing that the book's done.
No, fair. I can well imagine, because when I was going through it, I was like, I'm going to show these to my grandma. I haven't got around to it yet, but I certainly will, and I'd let you know what she says. Just going back to what it was like when you were taking these photos, what were people's like reactions to you when you were taking the photos and explaining to them what you were doing?
So firstly, when you speak in Punjabi, they're like really happy, because they're like, oh, you haven't forgotten us. You haven't forgotten your culture. And you explain to them what you're doing, and they love it. They're like, this is amazing. You want to tell our story. A lot of these people are just ignored. Like a lot of people, no one cares about them really. And I kind of felt that from like a long time. I'm like, these people work so hard. You go to this place and they show you so much love. Things aren't perfect, but then you can kind of understand why they're not. So the reception in general was amazing. Like everyone was up for it. And every time I would go back, I'd print all the photos and give them to everyone. Even if like I didn't think the photo was great, I would just print all of them and then go around handing people the pictures. And then you just start building this trust and these relationships. So I think overall people, I think, really took to it. And I was kind of sad that I wasn't able to go back and give them the book first, but it'll be nice that I can go back and say, look, you guys have been seen around the whole world. And yeah, that's going to be amazing.
The more that we talk and I discover about how you've gone about it, it's quite heartwarming to say the least. And it also, I think it's quite endearing to see that there are other people telling our own narrative.
I think what's important is, like, say, for example, for me, I know that I don't know loads about, say, Sikh history. But as I've been doing these things, these projects and taking pictures, I'm learning more and more. And say, for example, yourself, you know quite a lot. So when I see you share things, I'm like, okay, this makes sense. Like you shared something today and you broke it down. It's accessible and you don't realize it, but it's being seen by a lot of people and a lot of people that are a lot younger. So I've learned things maybe at an older age, maybe from a certain perspective, but then I've lived certain things as like my life. So certain people are just rebalancing things and we've had more of one or the other. So I think it's a good thing, and you'd be surprised like how many people see your content, because obviously a lot of people engage with you and you're knowledgeable within your field.
I'd like to think so, but equally in a similar stance to the way you kind of your passion for the photo book came from, actually, you know what, I can tell our narrative, or I can shine light on our people in a way that just hasn't been done before. Similarly, I think that's kind of where my passion comes from, which is I'm like, Sikh history is really, really rich and it is really, really detailed. And I think the main aim for me is to get Sikh history out to the masses in a way that's quite digestible. And I think in a similar vein to the way you were saying Punjabi really connects you to a culture or to a history, in a similar vein, that thread that I posted out today about Jassa Singh Ahluwalia came from literally reading 2 pages of a Punjabi book about the history of Harmandir Sahib. And again, a lot of this won't be accessible to the diaspora because of their own knowledge of Punjabi, or lack of Punjabi in this case. So I guess in a similar vein, we're just both trying to do justice to our own community or our own narratives or our own people. And hopefully we can continue with what we're doing.
I think the other thing is that, say, for example, you're more relatable than someone that maybe is from a different place. So growing up, I had loads of questions. Maybe you'd go to the Gurdwara or somewhere and you'd ask all these questions and the person wasn't able to answer them. So obviously you then have a sense of frustration. You either give up or you go out and find it yourself. And I think now if people are looking for it, they'll come across that yourself and loads of other people that are sharing things. And I think that's what's really making a big change.
Yeah. And I think one thing with our generation and this like layer of self-reflection or whatever you want to call it is that we're very much open to also being wrong. Like, so for argument's sake, I don't for any second think that I know anything. And time again, I have learned so much from people actually engaging with me or informing me of certain things that I just would never be aware of. Like, I take a lot of inspiration from kind of the work Sikh Archive does and the way that it's engaging the community on a topic or kind of getting you to think about something in a different perspective. Personally, for me, I found it really frustrating growing up, hearing these stories of these people like Jassa Singh Ahluwalia, Nawab Kapoor Singh, Akalifullah Singh, and then not being able to find a book that actually told you anything. And then you're like, well, does our history only exist in this oral tradition? And actually you find it doesn't. We have masses of literature.
I think generally it's good that you're saying that, and that the way everyone's conducting themselves is quite a good way and a responsible way to put that out there for certain people to see. Because I remember, because I'm friends with Suk as well, and in the early days, when you feel quite passionate, you might put things out in a certain way and it would anger people. And I think we might have had a conversation. I said, just ask people the question and put the information out there and let people kind of take their own view on it and work through whatever they need to think about it. And I feel like he's really good at putting things out there, especially viewpoints that people didn't think of. And I think that's quite a healthy thing to do.
I also think at the same time, we're always going to come up against a bit of resistance, because by having these questions or having these discussions, you're asking people to question their worldview, their foundation. For argument's sake, giving you a really clear example, within the Sikh community, there isn't really much emphasis on adoption. And I would probably go as far as saying that within the Sikh community, Punjabi community, it's almost looked down upon if you were to adopt. I genuinely know nobody within the Sikh community, Punjabi community, either here or elsewhere, that have adopted. I think there was one case I read in the newspaper, and that was because they had been refused adoption on whatever grounds. Anyway, going back to Sikh history, if you look at Guru Gobind Singh Ji's wife, she adopted a son after Guru Gobind Singh Ji passed away. His name was Ajit Singh, not to be mixed with the actual Sahibzada who was Baba Ajit Singh Ji. This is another Ajit Singh. And in the end, he tries to set himself up as the Guru, and Mataji basically tells him, like, I don't want you anymore in the Sikh community, excommunicate him, and he kind of dies a bit of a lonely death. Putting that aside, Mataji then, I wouldn't say adopts, but you can more or less argue the case. She brings up Jassa Singh Ahluwalia in Delhi. Now, I never knew the latter until I read the book a few days ago, and I only found out the former fact, again, by reading about Banda Singh Bahadur. There are, at the time, there's loads of kings, and they have what we would say are like court scribes. They're called vakils. They're not quite lawyers, which is, I guess, a modern translation. They're scribes, and they send letters on behalf of the kings and the princes. And in a lot of these letters that are contemporary at the time, so they're primary sources, they talk about this guy called Ajit Singh, and they say he's the son of the Guru. He's setting himself up as the Guru, and all of this. Turns out it's just an adopted child that I think it was Mata Sundari Ji adopt. Now, knowing those kind of two, especially the first historical fact, changes the perspective of adoption within the Punjabi community straight away, because you have something that you can draw a comparison to. And I think this is what I find really interesting is that, so just taking it back to one of my first year law history lectures, communities draw their identity from their memory, which comes from their history. And that shared memory is what frames the way we work, the way we act, and all the rest of it. So I find it really interesting that the more information we are pumping out there and bringing to people's attention, how this will impact then the community going forward. Because for argument's sake, even the history of Sikh women is starting to be told in a very different light. Certain women that haven't been brought to the attention of Sikh history are now coming to the forefront. It'd be interesting to see perhaps in 20 years, again, maybe another photo book capturing the community and seeing what the differences are and kind of where they've gone.
Shall I just quickly make a point on that? I think what you said is really good. And I think if there's certain issues in the community, going back and finding these stories and these moments is really powerful in addressing how we kind of think about ourselves now. And I think the same goes for other aspects of, like, say, music, poetry, photography. There's like, my photography was a reaction to that type of storytelling, which was just telling the stereotypes. It was just boring. Like, it's just reinforcing lots of narratives and traits. And I think for what I can do as a photographer is I go out there and find people doing different things. People be like, oh yeah, but I done a charity bike ride, and I went on the bike ride, and we went to Smethwick Gurdwara, everyone's Punjabi, Sikh, there's people from other cultures. And you just think, okay, you don't see this. So I took pictures there, and you just think, okay, we can ride a bike, we can do these things. We don't have to there's like, if people don't see it, for them, it's not a reality. So I try and go out of my way to show people doing different things, but they still have a connection to their faith and their culture. And that's only going to encourage people to be like, okay, I can be in a rock band and still have a dadi, or keep my gaze and eat bronte or whatever. Or I can become a Premier League football player or something. I don't know. It's just, these are the realities that we need to tell, and stories we need to tell. And that way more people will learn about who we are, and it will just make for a better society. But that's like an end goal further down.
Well, I'd almost argue it's like a continuous process, because it's like, I guess we're almost trying to get the community to engage with this stuff in order for them to almost navigate their own kind of life. So like, just a really easy one would be like, I used to really hate PE at school because like I'd wear a bog to school, and then if it was rugby or something and you get tackled, then your bog's all over the place, and you just like, and I know it's a really small, trivial example, but I am pretty sure anything who's gone to school has been in a similar situation, and they've always had to navigate then, all right, how do I do it? Do I have to tie my bog differently? Do I tie a patka that day? Do I just make sure that I don't get tackled? Like, I know it sounds really trivial and quite stupid, but actually in showing photos of a Singh playing rugby, you're like, yo, I can do that. If he can do it, I can do it. And you're right. And I guess it's a similar thing with the history stuff on behalf of myself, or the discussions on behalf of Sikh Archive, or even Shabad, or the research that Naam's doing. It's all bringing our narrative for what it is, and then just letting other people decide what to do with it. Obviously, we might make our own conclusions, but just like with your photographs, it's kind of like putting it in front of you and going, okay, now what do you think?
It's a great way to like challenge fear. Say if there's a example of Singh playing football, or Kaur playing football, and then on her team there's black and white people as well, and they're all celebrating together. If you see that picture, you'll be like, okay, I don't need to be scared. I can do this. Because every day Asian people play five-side football all the time, but you would never think that's a reality, but we all know that is a thing.
Yeah, unless you're a part of it, you wouldn't know. No, you're right. And I think it's very powerful in bringing those realities to the forefront, because they do impact then people's lives in a way that I think a lot of us might not necessarily appreciate. There was one thing that I just wanted to ask in relation to the photograph that you captured in the bin. When you were approaching kind of some of the tougher topics, for argument's sake, I wanted to know how you managed to get Uncle Ji to agree to capturing a photo of him smoking. How did those conversations happen? And like, how did you end up managing to capture such an honest photo?
I think as being a guy as well, I kind of had access to certain things. So obviously when they're drinking, I guess they're drinking at night. So I'm not drinking, but I'm there. So if people are drinking, I'm there. I'm kind of like in each environment. And then you can talk to people. They feel more relaxed. And I guess as time goes on and the more time you spend with them, they kind of allow you to take pictures of certain things, and you can explain, oh, this needs to be natural. But then also I have to make a decision as to, okay, cool, I've captured this. Now I'm going to put it out there. No, you need to think of the consequences as well. So for me, because I was capturing on film, it's quite hard for me to capture some of the stuff because it was happening at night time. So even to capture this photo, I had to be really still. And I'm thinking more about the circumstances because I've kind of skipped ahead. I've been allowed to take this picture. And when you take the pictures, you have to think, okay, what am I doing with these pictures? Is it just going to get people's attention and it's going to be good for me? How does it fit in with the story? So there was a picture of someone that was completely drunk. Like, I've never seen people that drunk in my life. And obviously we live in England, right? So we've seen a lot. And I was like, this is worse than people in England. Like, it's awful. And so I'm like, do I take a picture of this person in this vulnerable state? And he can't really give me permission. And then would I show this image? And then I think I did take the image. I might have asked family member, but then I don't think the image came out right. But if it had, I would have had to think, okay, am I going to put this out? I'm going to bring this book back and this person is going to see this.
Yeah, and they've captured forever in that state. Even once they're dead, if that photo is in the book, it will always be there.
Yeah, whereas I think this, so he'd be like my equivalent of Nana that age. He with him, I was allowed to have access to most of these pictures. So I think there was that, okay, I'm going to let you take this picture type thing. There wasn't any resistance. It was acceptance because he's in the picture. People are in the book multiple times. So you can see that people are multiple people as well, because we're not always the same person. We're different people in different scenarios. So I think for me, I thought I can't not include this because people see this in the bin. If we don't see it here, people there see it. So it's nothing that we need to hide. And I think the other thing is because if our relationship with the pug here is different to the relationship with the pug over there.
Oh, completely. Just in relation then to taking those kind of more honest photos, did you ever, not necessarily challenge it, but did those photos ever lead to conversations with the people in the photos about what was happening?
Also, the bin is really small. So you see people all the time. There's no rush. So you just sit down and talk to people. And then sometimes some people open up and you can get a picture of them. Everyone asks you, everyone talks to each other so they know what's going on. They ask you about what life is like here. It kind of makes you realize we're not as balanced as them either. Like, they don't have access to things, but then we also don't have access to things. For example, these guys can grow their own food across different seasons. They know when to eat certain things. They have more connection with the earth. They breathe in healthier air. But they don't have access to education and social mobility. If they did, they'd probably be living a better life than us. So there's things that I'm thinking, hold on, I'm living a backwards life to a certain extent. And they would be like, oh, you guys don't have enough time to see your families and stuff like this. All you guys do is work. So there's that element. But then they don't understand. I guess sometimes, obviously, we are coming home, we're cooking, we're cleaning, we're doing all these things. Sometimes some people have a knocker, but then, you know what, they work hard as well. So there's just like, you share these stories and you try and, I guess, and then I would show them stuff off my phone. I'm like, oh, look, this is what the bus is like. So really simple things. Or this is me on the bus. And they're like, look at the roads, look how clean everything is. So it's just that exchange of information and ideas. And then I say, look, you know how you reacted to that? People are going to react to your life in England. So I think they were like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I think that's something they really took to and appreciated.
I can well imagine. Binned life certainly has massive benefits. But then equally, as you said, there are certain benefits that we have in the diaspora that you're like, oh, actually, we kind of want to, almost like a cross between the two, and you've got like a perfect life, so to speak. One of the last questions that I wanted to put to you. You were talking earlier about how you've kind of actually only taught yourself to take photos in the last 6 months, which I find quite funny considering the photo book was taken over a space of a few years. In light of that, are there any photos that you look at now and are like, oh, I wish I had done this, or I wish I'd done that? And equally, do you think actually maybe I should have waited until now to do the entire photo book, or are you kind of like, you know what I've learned doesn't actually necessarily impact the photo book in perhaps the way I might expect?
think obviously if I had done like for example a second edition, I maybe would change one or two of the pictures, but I think you naturally as a creative person you progress anyway, and I think I may have added one or two things in slightly more differently, like a more artistic type photo, because there's a lot of pictures here of people, so I may have left one or two out and replaced that with something a bit more natural and a bit more organic. I think the story will always change. So I think literally before the release, I looked through some of the images and I thought, why is this image not in this book? It's amazing. And I thought, you know what? If I've already got 10 amazing pictures of old people, I don't need another 5. So I have to just pick the right ones that represent that I guess that moment. But you might think, oh, that picture should have been in it, but then it has to replace something else that is telling the same thing, but it might look more beautiful. Because I think it's easier to take pretty pictures. That's what we see. That's what Instagram is for, pretty pictures. You have to include pictures of things that kind of stitch everything together. So there's 1 or 2 pages where it's the full 2 pages, the image, like of the kid or of the doors. It just kind of breaks up the story into chapters and sets a scene. And it might not be the most amazing picture, but that picture is required in that narrative, in that context, in that medium.
Well, I think you're right, because I think the first photo is a photo of a manja against a wall, and I went, I get it. Like, and I know it sounds really random, but you're like, that fits perfectly. And when I describe it, some people listening are probably like, what? That doesn't sound correct, or whatever they might, like your initial assumption might be. But actually, once you go through it, you genuinely you lose yourself in something quite emotive, really. Going through that book, it was highly emotive, because you're like, and I think you're right. You can relate to it on various levels. So you can relate to it purely on, like, for argument's sake, the grandmother, grandchild. Oh yeah, and like anyone who's had that relationship with a grandmother will be able to relate. But then there's also added layers. For argument's sake, they're in the Pind, we're in the diaspora. They're probably going to always talk Punjabi. We have certain intricacies. So for argument's sake, my grandma talked predominantly in Punjabi, and I respond to her kind of 70% in Punjabi, 30% in English. Whereas I'm sure that doesn't happen with them. And then again, I'm sure there's like various other kind of aspects like caste, drug abuse, even just the way kind of the social structures are, like the photos of all the men and the women cooking. Again, we have certain comparisons to make, like at the Gurdwara, you'll see certain things, but people outside of a kind of a colored background or an ethnic background will just have no idea. So in light of everything that's going on in India at the moment in respect to the Kisan protests in Delhi, first question I want to ask you is there a side of you that wants to be there right now capturing photos? And then the second question is, does your book does it have like a different impact now in light of everything that's happening?
I think the emotion and towards the people, I think that was the same emotion that I felt as what we're feeling now. Like, okay, these people are ignored, they work hard, like everything's coming out. Like, I'm like, why am I capturing this? There's a reason why I'm capturing this. So I think that same feeling is there now. And in terms of going there, yeah, I've been wanting to go since April. And I've been asking my mum, can I go? Can I go? Because I'll just go and I'll just turn up there for a week. But obviously with COVID, with what's happening here, it's just, yeah, she's like, oh, it's not safe, and so stuff like this. So for me, I would just jump on a plane, go there, start capturing things, just that being part of that movement. And I think it is really important. I feel like I don't think the book sales have been impacted by it, but I think it's for the people that really wanted to go there, they couldn't because of COVID and because of the protests. I think it's something that means a lot. And it sheds more light on the people. Like, who are these people? I think people are tracing interest. And when you look at this, you're like, okay, these are the people. This is their life. This book is their life. And I think that's kind of just heightened what this book means, I think.
So I guess to summarize that, actually what you're saying is when the farmers have won their protest, because, like, let's be real, their morcha is going to become fateh. Like, there's no other way about it. Your book is actually going to hold a quite interesting position, because what it does is it catalogues in a very honest manner. So not in a like a Eurocentric colonistic perspective, from a very honest perspective from within the community of the people who have probably staged one of the world's largest revolutions. And I think when you put it like that, it takes on a very different significance. And I think actually when you go through those photos with that in the back of your mind, you will take different kind of emotion or a different feeling from it. And I think it's awesome. The only reason I asked you whether you wish to be there is because I could well imagine you would love to be there.
I think the one thing I would like, I feel like as a photographer or someone that tells a story, you have a responsibility. And sometimes I think there's a lot of photographers doing great work, but sometimes they can miss certain things that can be quite powerful, especially if they put it in a group of images. And I think that's like, I put a tweet out about Sidhu Moosewala's music video, right? The song's good. Like, we need the pump songs. It's got history in it, blah, blah, blah. And then in the visuals, it's maybe not his fault. I think it's just like the women were missed out. The women are at the protest. That's all it was. It's just to have that included. Because if you look back in 20 years, you'll be like, yeah, but all the Bande were there, all the Babbe were there. No, that everyone's there together. So I feel like it's not sometimes that's done something that's done on purpose. It can miss out, but it has such a big impact in our history, like you said. Yeah, I think stuff like that is really important, just to take a moment and think, okay, what is going out and how is it going out?
I think what was more interesting about the comment you made wasn't the comment itself, because I think it is 110% bang on in that the visuals for the song didn't actually do justice to the movement. Because if we're brutally honest about this, women are very much part and parcel of this movement, and probably arguably the engine. We've all seen the viral video clips of Bibiyan doing bullying at the expense of Modi, catching jokes at the expense of Modi, telling everyone they ain't going anywhere until they've got what they've come for. I think it's a beautiful thing to see. But I think what's more interesting is people's reactions to your tweet. And it made me laugh because it was stupid, but actually discussing it now actually goes to highlight a rather dark underbelly to the community, which is people's reactions to your comment were like, oh yeah, he wants women like to dance in the video or whatever. Like, it was taken in it was interpreted through such a misogynistic lens. And actually what you were saying was the complete opposite.
I think there's like a few things. I think sometimes, when something's so emotional and it's come from an emotional place, people are thinking, why is this person saying something? So I get that. And then I think the other thing was like, so obviously people put their age in their bio, right? And I'm like, this kid's 13 years younger than me. I'm like, I might have thought that then. So I'm like, okay, can't take it seriously. Like, he's seeing something else. So I'm kind of just like trying to be understanding.
No, that I don't disagree with. And I think it's completely correct that we need to to understand people's perspectives and where they come from. But I think the trick we miss in doing that is the people who are then making these assumptions aren't actually doing the same. And I think that bit is the slight, I wouldn't say worry, but it's kind of interesting, because as a community, what we need to be doing is fostering constructive dialogue amongst one another. So for argument's sake, when you reached out about the book, like, let's be real, we know of each other through social media or whatever, but we don't know one another. But as soon as you reached out, I went, yeah, of course. Like, because if I can do anything through my platform to help you, why not? And it's as simple as that. And I think it's a completely mature stance to take in obviously understanding their perspective, but it's interesting to see how that perspective is quite dominant in the community. Very few people perhaps saw where you were coming, but a lot more actually misunderstood what you were saying. It was just an interesting observation that I thought was also quite funny at the time. I can't disagree with what you were saying about basically understanding where they're coming from. So no, fair point.
I think things like collaborating and coming together, because not everyone's going to see 100%. And I feel like sometimes we all want to work with people that are 100%, but I don't think that's the case, because I got 5 artists to paint an image from the book, and I sold those images, and then half of that money from that sale went to charity. And that was something that wasn't beneficial to me making my money back for the book. But I knew that I realized in that moment, okay, I have an opportunity to raise money and I feel like I can make my money back and do something good. And like it gave them something, they could be part of my project and I could be part of them. And we've raised money for a good cause. So it's kind of like just this coming together of each other and helping each other for a greater good. It kind of pays off.
Completely. And it also leads to, like, as you were saying at the beginning of the podcast, kind of certain things just snowball. And just like talking from my personal perspective, the first podcast I did with Satnam about what he dubs the golden age of Sikh history has now led to us discussing even more podcasts in kind of going in depth in certain kind of areas. I'm enjoying it because I get to learn so much. I get to research. I get to, as nerdy as it sounds, I get to kind of feed off someone else who's in a similar situation. But then equally, I'm enjoying it because I know the benefit, hopefully, it will have to the community. Because whilst I was doing my history, the biggest frustration that I had was I couldn't access, or there were very few resources on Sikh history. Or at the time, I thought there were very few resources. Just like perhaps you're trying to do justice to the history of our people at like right now, as in you were saying people in the bin have ignored, and it's a similar that I think we've seen with our own history, that only certain things are brought to the forefront for various reasons. And it's extremely frustrating for anyone trying to then find out more and more about themselves. So I guess in a sense, we're both trying to do justice to our community and to our narratives.
I had one point. I know we've been talking for a while, but I think it's something that I wanted to say earlier. Like the stories that are happening here, as I'm meeting more people and the people are different. Say, for example, someone might be practicing Sikhi quite a lot to someone that maybe is loosely practicing it or relates to it. There's like, they both have their stories. Because, for example, I try to put all of these stories in one place. That's if someone's a Sikh, if someone is a Punjabi, they can be all those other things. But if they're also those things, we also have to be everything together, if that makes sense. So, for example, some people that have a dastar or a certain type of dastar have said, oh, people always look at me and they think I'm extreme and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, I know this person and they're so warm, but they're just for me, it's just a normal person. So I think that it's important that people see people and they're like, okay, like it becomes more like it's not acceptable. It's like, okay, yeah, I can do this. I can look cool and still practice my faith. Then I done a series with my friend Suk. It's called Boys Day Out, and we went to central London and we just like reenacted a day out with the lads to see like tourist things, but they're all wearing kurta pajama. And it's like, why not wear a kurta? It's basically the original tracksuit. So we just called it the original tracksuit, that series. And I was just like, these are things that we can like change narratives and show people, okay, you can be this. Or if there's like a couple, like they're really trendy and young, doing like a fashion shoot with them. For me, that's documentary. But then we're kind of covering a different audience, because then a young person might be like, you know what? Yeah, I can go out with someone that has the star. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm not going out with someone that wears a bug. And then it gives like everyone confidence within who they are. And it brings different people together. And like someone that might be gay or lesbian can be part of the story. Someone that's doing something that's not normal, like playing sports or being an artist, putting them in the story. Then if I'm going to the Gurdwara, telling that story of how, like, what happens there and telling people stories. It's like all these different stories of what makes us who we are being told in one place. And I think that's quite powerful.
I wouldn't disagree whatsoever. And I think just relating it back to your book, I think that is what gives the book like the impact it has, because it provides a narrative, but it also kind of challenges your preconceived ideas of what life in the bin should be like, or what you think life in the bin should be like. Do you have plans on doing any future projects? And if so, what are they?
I'm going to continue capturing our story here in the UK. And I think that's something that's going to take me a long time, because it takes time to build relationships, go out, meet people, and then putting everything together, because there's a lot happening with who we are. So I think that's something, I think that's something I'm working on. And I'm probably going to try and do other things that are not related to this at all.
What was it like personally doing all of this?
I think doing this whole thing, I think I would say it's probably changed my whole life and the people that I've met. So everyone that I tend to meet most of the time will become my friend. So a lot of the people, if I'm taking pictures of them repeatedly, is because they're my friends. And it's just, and learning so much about who we are and how unique and different we all are. And I feel like I'm quite lucky to see that, because I get to kind of see like all extremes. So I think I'm quite grateful that I'm able to see that. And I'm really excited to maybe share that. I think that's kind of like, I just wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting to be here, like doing all of these things just because I wanted to share a story. So I think that's something that's happened, I guess, that I'm like, wow, okay, I really appreciate this.